We're waiting to get cued by the television. Thank you very much. Welcome, everybody. My name is Paul Gunter, and I'm here to welcome you on behalf of the Nuclear-Free Takoma Park Committee. A little bit about the committee. We were formed by an ordinance in 1983 that essentially established the city of Takoma Park as a nuclear-free zone. The goals of the nuclear-free zone are to prohibit the production of nuclear weapons in the city of Takoma Park, but also to establish a boycott of nuclear weapons manufacturers with any contracts that the city would have. So the overall response has been an awareness of the issues of nuclear armaments and the need to abandon nuclear weapons. Tonight, we have a special event where we are commemorating a couple of nuclear disasters. The very first nuclear weapons test over 70 years ago in the New Mexico desert, the Trinity nuclear test, was the precursor to the atomic bombing of Hiroshima and Nagasaki in 1945. And since then, the issue of nuclear weapons proliferation, nuclear testing, continues to be a major concern and threat to humanity. But also, 36 years ago today, there was a uranium mill spill in Church Rock, New Mexico, where over 90 million gallons of radioactive waste was spilled from a broken dam that spilled into the Rio Puerco, a river in New Mexico. Some 350 Navajo sheep herder families lived on that land, and it was just weeks after the accident at 3 Mile Island in 1979. But to date, it's still one of the forgotten nuclear disasters here in the United States, but is still generally part of the awareness that we need to cultivate as we strive for a nuclear-free world. What we'd like to do, first of all, before we get to our featured speakers tonight, is show you a short video by Asao Hashimoto, a Japanese visual artist, who produced a time-lapse map of every nuclear weapons explosion on the Earth since 1945. And so we'll begin that with that video. Okay. If we could have the lights. Okay, thank you very much. So over 2,000 nuclear weapons tests. And the concern is that we continue to see the threat of nuclear proliferation and a concern about the resumption of nuclear testing even. Tonight we have two featured speakers to address this issue of nuclear weapons proliferation. Our first speaker tonight is Bob Alvarez. Bob is not only a Takoma Park resident, but he's also a senior science advisor for the International Policy Studies in Washington, D.C. He's a noted nuclear weapons critic, and he's also advised the U.S. government and U.S. Senate on nuclear weapons issues. And he's also a humanitarian. He's been engaged as an expert witness on the behalf of, for example, the Marshall Islanders, who were subjected to nuclear weapons testing and testified on their behalf in the humanitarian effort. Bob is here tonight to discuss with us about the ongoing issue and efforts to outlaw nuclear weapons, and also the latest news on the Iranian deal that has just been negotiated. Thank you very much, Bob.
Thank you. So I guess I need to get keyed up here. Just press the magic button. Oh, this one here, isn't it? Oh, there's one on the right. Okay. I'm going to talk about a couple things tonight. One is the humanitarian initiative to outlaw nuclear weapons, and also just a brief talk about the agreement that the United States and 5 other nations have reached with Iran relative to their nuclear program. In February of this year, the Republic of the Marshall Islands filed a lawsuit in federal court and in the International Court of Justice against the nuclear weapons states who you have seen have detonated all these nuclear weapons, asserting that they violated both the Nuclear Non-Proliferation Treaty, Article 4 of the treaty, which requires the nuclear weapons states to engage in good faith negotiations for disarmament, but also to basically invoking international law. For those who don't know much about the Marshall Islands, it was a trust territory that was seized from the Japanese after World War II. Several weeks after the United States seized control, they basically paid a local leader $10 for the unlimited access to their islands. And then from that point, from 1946 to 1958, the United States detonated 67 nuclear weapons over the Marshall Islands, particularly the largest of the nuclear weapons that were developed, the thermonuclear or fission-boosted weapons, leaving behind a great deal of destruction, destroyed entire islands and widespread contamination. There are a large number of Marshall Islands people who are nuclear exiles who cannot go to their homelands because they remain contaminated. The United States government feels that it's too expensive to remediate this and entered into an agreement in 1986, presumably to settle all these matters which remain open. The lawsuit was dismissed in federal court more recently, and it's now being pursued on appeal, and is also going on in the International Court of Justice. Dovetailing with this is what's called the Humanitarian Initiative to Outlaw Nuclear Weapons. This is something that has gained momentum that came out of the 2010 Nuclear Nonproliferation Treaty Review Conference. Every 5 years, the nations who are part of this treaty are to review the status of the agreement, and it's the largest agreement, a multilateral agreement of its kind dealing with nuclear weapons. And they basically keyed in on some language that was adopted at that 2010 conference, decrying the catastrophic humanitarian consequences of any use of nuclear weapons and calling for states to, quote, comply with applicable international law, including international humanitarian law. Now, those are special terms. International humanitarian law deals with things such as the Geneva Convention and the Code of Conduct of War, ranging from war crimes to other things. So these are very important words. Between March of 2013, December of 2014, there were 3 international conferences in Oslo, Mexico City, and Vienna focused on the humanitarian effects of nuclear weapons and establishing the idea is to establish a new international legal instrument that would outlaw nuclear weapons. What they're getting at is this huge gap in the Nuclear Nonproliferation Treaty, which was essentially a construct of the Cold War between the 2 Cold War superpowers, the United States and Russia, then in the Soviet Union. Article 4, while it does call for the nuclear weapon states who are signatories of the treaty to engage in good faith negotiation to reduce their arsenal, there is no real legal binding requirement beyond that, those glittering generalities. So to a large extent, the Nuclear Nonproliferation Treaty remains an artifact of the Cold War, and there's this huge gap, a legal gap, which does not specify when or how or what are the terms and conditions of getting rid of these weapons, and might they be considered essentially, their use be considered war crime acts under humanitarian law. These are all big gaps that have to be filled, and this is what these groups are doing. In December of last year, the Austrian government and 68 other states pledged forward a document called the Vienna Pledge, quote, to fill the legal gap for the prohibition and elimination of nuclear weapons. This is a very sticky point because there are several nations in Europe under the NATO treaty and in Europe who are under what we call the nuclear umbrella of the United States, such as Japan, who are very nervous about this particular framework because it really goes to the heart of what these governments are doing. This initiative exposes a huge loophole, as I mentioned, carved out by the 5 nuclear weapons states originally. And as I said, Article 4 requires the states to engage in good faith nuclear disarmament, but does not require any disarmament or set a timeline in which it should occur. And this initiative is really a direct answer to the lack of progress. As you see in this graphic here, you see the United States. There are some 19,000 nuclear warheads in the world. The United States and Russia basically have over 90% of these weapons. The United States nuclear arsenal, I can speak to more directly. Roughly 60% of it is not deployed. 40% of it has been officially discarded by the U.S. military, but it remains intact. And in my opinion, the U.S. nuclear weapons program is engaging in a very dangerous form of hoarding of excess nuclear weapons, and are resisting their physical elimination and dismantlement. But they get away with this because there are no real, unless there are binding agreements to allow them to do this, they will continue to do what they feel. Needless to say, the humanitarian initiative received the chilly, some might say hostile reception from the nuclear weapon states for an understandable reason. The United States, Russia, China in particular, are engaged in costly modernization efforts that all but guarantee the continued existence of nuclear weapons for decades, perhaps well through this century. And the humanitarian initiative seeks to make nuclear states seriously negotiate towards nuclear disarmament. Currently, the United States is planning to spend more than $1 trillion on weapons production, infrastructure, ballistic missiles, subs, bombers, new warheads, actually refurbished warheads. All these efforts create at least the appearance that the United States and Russia and other countries which are involved in their own nuclear modernization projects intend to avoid disarmament indefinitely. This gives you an idea here of what it's been costing the United States for nuclear weapons. What I did here was to simply look at this as if this were a business. What is the per unit cost of a nuclear warhead per year based on what it cost 30 years ago and what it costs now? And as you see, in 1985, we had an arsenal that was 300% larger than what we have right now. And the average per warhead cost was about $354,000 a year. We now, our arsenal has dropped by a factor of 3 or 300%, and the cost per warhead is now increased by 500%. So nuclear weapons are getting increasingly expensive to maintain, and we need to have some sort of control over this, and we need to start looking at how do we get rid of these things in a serious manner. Now, landmines are banned by international convention because they are proven to be, quote, excessively injurious weapons that are indiscriminate and grossly violate international humanitarian law and the conduct of war. Nuclear weapons are far worse than landmines. I mean, there is no other instrument of war that exists, that has existed since 1945, that has such a profound destructive impact. We're talking about destruction of life on the planet, a single bomb that can destroy an entire city, yet these are considered very desirable instruments of war. It's not subject to any control and not subject to any sort of moral standards. But on April of this year, 159 states have formed part of the humanitarian initiative, over 80% of the United Nations membership. Support is building worldwide for nuclear weapons to be recognized under binding international law as unacceptable instruments of war that belong in the dustpan of history. I think you should be paying attention to this particular initiative. The last time we had a serious global movement was during the nuclear freeze campaign of the 1980s that helped sort of, I think, pave the way for the downsizing of the U.S. and Soviet arsenals. Before that, I think it's important to know, or to remember, while we were kids, or some of us weren't maybe around at that time, in 1963, the United States, England, and Soviet Union entered into the first global environmental treaty by banning the explosion of nuclear weapons in the open air, in outer space, and underwater. And so we have a tradition to build upon that. I'm just going to briefly go over the Iranian situation. To a large extent, the origins of the problem that were created, that we're now wrestling with Iran, were actually, the seeds were planted by the United States. The origin of Iranian's nuclear weapons program basically come from the Atoms for Peace program, where the United States basically provided the research reactors, highly enriched uranium, technical know-how, provided education to the nuclear experts of this. And following the explosion of the nuclear weapon in 1974 by India, the United States became a lot more serious about controlling the spread of nuclear weapons through the Atoms for Peace program. But if any of you are familiar with the Norse myths of planting dragon's teeth, the dragon teeth myth is that once you plant dragon's teeth, dragons will appear from the ground and multiply. And to a large extent, that's what we've done with the Atoms for Peace program. And to a large extent, our efforts to stem proliferation in terms of what we call loose nuclear material and the like are really involved cleaning up after the Atoms for Peace parade of starting in the 1950s. The United States basically gave out tens of tons of highly enriched uranium to countries around the world with the idea of promoting nuclear power of the peaceful atom. And now we're in the process of trying to retrieve that material, and hopefully we can. In 1967, the U.S. provided the Tehran Research Reactor, which is a key issue right now in the Iranian controversy, a small research reactor that basically can produce plutonium. And it basically is a reactor that requires highly enriched uranium. This is the primary justification right now for Iran's uranium enrichment program. In 2009, because it was expected to run out of fuel after failing to obtain it from France, Argentina, and Russia, Iran declared that it started enriching uranium up to 20%. In February 2012, Iran loaded its first batch of uranium-produced fuel rods into the reactor. This was provided by the United States. The path for nonproliferation, there's a lot of information here in this slide, but you can see that Iran took advantage of a lot of cooperation from several countries. When the United States sort of severed its relationship with Iran in 1980 after the overthrow of the Shah, initially, the Ayatollah Khomeini was very adamantly opposed to pursuing nuclear weapons or nuclear power in general. He considered it to be an objectionable thing from a religious perspective. When he passed away and the war began between Iran and Iraq, Iran shifted towards looking at acquiring and developing a nuclear infrastructure, and over a period of several years, basically got a great deal of assistance, particularly after the end of the Cold War, from Russia and China. And Russia and China have been major players in helping Iran. Russia completed construction of a large 1,000-megawatt reactor that's producing electricity that's not part of this nuclear agreement right now, mainly because the fuel is being provided by Russia. Once the fuel is irradiated, it produces a certain amount of plutonium. The deal between Iran and Russia is that Russia takes back that spent fuel, so there's no issue here about using that spent fuel to extract the plutonium for bombs. Centrifuges, just a very brief discussion. It's basically a cylinder with a rotor in the middle. If you know what a device is to dry out lettuce and spinach, it's based on that same principle, except you're driving heavier gas outward at a force 1,000,000 times greater than gravity. And so it basically causes the heavier molecules to accumulate near the wall and the lighter molecules to accumulate close to the stem. And these centrifuges there have to be thousands of them. And this process is be repeated over and over and over and over again. We now know that Pakistan provided a great deal of know-how and gave a big boost to the Iranian nuclear enrichment program. Here are some events that led up to the current crisis. Iran essentially was caught lying about what it was doing and agreed to undergo talks. Keep in mind, by the way, Iran is a signatory of the Nuclear Non-Proliferation Treaty. So go figure. This is what goes on inside this treaty. By May of 2003, Iran produced about 8,960 kilograms of enriched uranium up to 5% and about 160 kilograms of uranium up to 20%. When you enrich uranium, once it goes to that 20% line, it becomes much, much easier, and you start to have an exponential increase in the amount of uranium-235. It's much easier to obtain. And that additional centrifuges were found to be operating at a secret military base at the same time. This was basically met with sanctions. International, multinational entities imposed sanctions against Iran. They basically curtailed their oil purchases. They cut off a lot of flow of banking and commerce. Right now, at this time, people living in Tehran have no access to ATM machines. That kind of banking is forbidden under the sanctions. Iran has been losing a great deal of income, which has been made worse by the declining price in oil. And I think that this has had a major effect on the desire of Iran to want to negotiate. I also want to step back and remind you, if you followed the news way back when the George W. Bush administration came to power in 2000, in 2001, 2002, Iran sought rapprochement with the United States. And the United States response to this was to declare it a member of the axis of evil. And that slammed the door shut, and I think had a great deal to do with Iran's motivation to go nuclear. What the Obama administration is trying to do now is to basically roll that back. This could have been prevented. But I think the George W. Bush administration really paved the way and opened the door for Iran to pursue a nuclear weapons option by essentially officially declaring them to be an enemy which the United States might be able to strike militarily. And so Iran was thinking about self-defense and also about nuclear weapons being a regional equalizer. Negotiating an agreement. Finally, after the election of the Iranian president, which led to an agreement in November 2013 called Joint Plan of Action, this was a 6-month interim agreement to work out a comprehensive solution. China, France, Germany, the Russian Federation, Great Britain, the United Kingdom, United States, and the European Union are all part of this negotiation process. This negotiation took effect in January of 2014, and by July of this year, the agreement has been, in terms of the framework, the details of the framework have been sort of worked out. Here are some details. Iran forswears development of nuclear weapons and agreement to remain in the Nuclear Non-Proliferation Treaty. To a large extent, the final agreement hinges on how many of these centrifuges Iran may operate at specific times. It has about 19,000. It has agreed to cut it back to 6,000, which is considered sufficient to allow Iran to produce enough low-enriched uranium for its current research reactor program, which, by the way, was initially provided by the United States. The centrifuge stockpile will be reduced over a 10-year period. This is a significant sort of step, I think, in a positive direction. Iran's stockpile of enriched uranium, that 960 kilograms of uranium-235 that's been enriched at 20%, will be reduced down to about 5% of its total weight. Iran will reframe a reprocessing of the chemical separation of plutonium from spent fuel. It also agrees to on-site unannounced international inspections and monitoring with a window of time no greater than 24 days. 24 days, that's right. IAEA will be monitoring this for 25 years. I was involved in securing the spent fuel in North Korea in 1994-95, where we had a framework agreement with North Korea and established a similar program where their spent fuel was placed into containers. It was subject to 24/7 surveillance and IAEA inspections. And if you recall, this is another thing that the George W. Bush administration effectively blew up and caused it to unravel. Iran also has a reactor, a pressurized heavy water reactor that is, these are very efficient producers of plutonium. And they can produce plutonium and you can remove the spent fuel while the reactor is operating, which makes it very, very difficult to detect what you're doing there. Iran has agreed to convert this reactor to low-enriched uranium, and which basically greatly reduces the capability of the potential of that reactor to produce plutonium. And the UN and European Union sanctions will be lifted once the IAEA verifies implementation of the agreement. I think the likelihood this agreement is going to stick. It's going to pass. The Congress, despite the opposition, does not have enough votes to overcome a veto of their disapproval. The Congress has 60 days. Even if this agreement is disapproved of, the sanctions that are in place by the European Union and other nations will be lifted. So it isn't that the United States is sort of the major gatekeeper in this. This is a multilateral process. And if the planets are aligned and we are living in a time of good fortune, this may also be a much more fundamentally altering situation relative to Iran, the Middle East, the United States. But that remains to be seen. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Bob. We're going to hold questions until after our second speaker. Tonight we have Michael Wally. Michael participated in a plowshares action along with Sister Megan Rice and Greg Bourget-Obed at the Y-12 nuclear weapons complex in Oak Ridge, Tennessee. This facility has been known as the Fort Knox of uranium for its alleged security, but an 84-year-old nun and her two cohorts were able to penetrate the facility and mark it with blood, mark it with signs and slogans, and to illuminate just how precarious nuclear weapons bring us to destruction. And we're very honored to have Mike here tonight to basically tell his story. And after Mike is done, then we'll have an opportunity for questions and comments. Thank you.
Yes. Hello, my name's Michael Wally. I'm one of the three Transform Now plowshares activists who 3 years ago this month on July the 28th in the middle of the night, wee hours of that particular morning, we got to the HEUMF building, the Highly Enriched Uranium Materials Facility building, a multi-million-dollar fortress-like building that warehouses, we were told, over about 10,000 nuclear weapons of mass destruction worth of highly enriched, weapons-ready uranium. The bombs are not assembled there. They merely process the uranium until it is weapons ready and then ship it to various other locations around the country where it is put into usable weapons of mass destruction. This is a photograph of the in the news of myself and my co-defendant. She 3 years ago, Sister Megan Rice was 82 years of age, so she is now 85. This is Greg Bourget-Obed. He's a repeater. He did about 6 plowshares. He's been very focused on the efforts to eliminate these criminal weapons and to stop the nuclear weapons of mass production activities going on in the U.S. and elsewhere around the world. We planned the event for months in advance. We discussed many scenarios of what might happen. We had every expectation based upon information available to the general public that we might succeed in getting to the building that has been boastfully spoken of as the Fort Knox of the U.S. Nuclear weaponry around the world. We got to it. She was 82 years of age when we did it. We were undetected. We got to the very building. We made no attempt to enter the building. We had benign, lawful intentions. We made statements about the criminality of a vast array of U.S. government policies, including its continuing noncompliance with the 1968 Nuclear Nonproliferation Treaty. I understand that that particular site, the Oak Ridge Y-12, located outside of Knoxville, Tennessee, that it at one time hosted a visitation by the IAEA, International Atomic Energy Agency. It's been quite a while since the U.S. government has thrown out the welcome mat for IAEA inspection teams, although the U.S. and other governments are continuing to demand that the Iranians open up their nation to such inspections. This is very unequitable. We should, by all means, as patriotic citizens of the world, support the idea of transparency and the empowerment of the international community to usher in the eradication of weapons of mass destruction. And we should support the rule of international law by all means, and we should not be selective in our outrage against nuclear weapons proliferation by any country, including the ones that we happen to have been born into. I don't know what else to say exactly. It was 2 months ago today that the three of us were ordered by the Sixth Federal Court of Appeals panel to be released. Thank you. My prison card. I was, let's see, what was I going to say? We had a pro bono legal firm, Oric, that Sister Megan had a relative that worked for them, and they got wind of our plight, and as a consequence, they agreed to, on a free of charge basis, do the appeals for us in the Sixth Federal Circuit Court of Appeals in Cincinnati, Ohio, which heard the case. Our defense lawyer pleaded on our behalf for 15 minutes. The prosecutor, a Roman Catholic, he pleaded, he spoke against us, as he had at the trial, which occurred in early May of 2013. So the appeals hearing before the three-judge panel occurred on March the 12th, and it was on May the 8th of this year that they overturned the more serious of the two felony charges that we were found guilty of by the 12-member jury on May the 8th of 2013. So when we were, the overturning of the sabotage charge happened on the 2-year anniversary of when we were found guilty and taken into custody. So then 8 days later, on May the 16th, 2 months ago today, we were released. And see, I don't know what else to say about it exactly. We had prepared it for months in advance. One of the potentialities that we discussed was what if, when we got onto the Oak Ridge Y-12 site, which is part of a U.S. government landholding, which includes over 50 square miles, what if once we got onto the property, we had a long hike through the woods in the middle of the night? She was taking heart medication, Sister Megan at the time, so if we could get there, you can be sure that Al-Qaeda operatives could get there. And that was one of the things we discussed. What would happen if we ran into an Al-Qaeda team, on the site? Who would we surrender to? And but we did it on the basis of the idea that we could potentially, with the help of God's grace, be successful in getting all of the things we had planned carefully accomplished, which we did. We had no intention of doing any mischief. We had benign intentions. We had perfectly legal intentions. We have one remaining charge that is still being leveled against us. They're going to sentence us again based upon the one remaining charge, which they claim, falsely, that we destroyed government property. Well, the Auschwitz concentration camp fences were part of the illegal activity of the nuclear weapons-seeking Adolf Hitler Nazi government of Nazi-era Germany. that the fences around Auschwitz and the other concentration camps were not lawful property. They were part of a criminal misuse, unjust use of governance powers, and so is the U.S. government nuclear weapons activity. They have no right to have these weapons. Dr. Martin Luther King died in 1968 in Tennessee. He had condemned them in life. Dorothy Day, the foundress of the Catholic Worker Movement, 1 month after the Hiroshima and Nagasaki bombings, she condemned the nuclear weapons. These things are illegal and immoral and ungodly, and they've got to be sent back to hell where they came from, and the sooner the better. There's no such thing as a good nuclear weapon, and the misuse of the name of religion for them, the Islamic bomb in Pakistan, the Hindu bomb in India, the Jewish bomb in Israel, the Christian interfaith Protestant U.S. bomb and French bomb and English bomb and the communist bomb and the capitalist bomb. They're all devilish. They have nothing to do with the common good. They have nothing to do with social justice. And I could say more, but should I open it up to discussion? Or it's
and I can help you facilitate that. If you have, do we have a microphone? And what we'll do is we'll share your questions and comments. And if you have a question, please raise your hand. Okay. If you'd like, you can identify yourself and then direct your question, and then we'll come close to the mic to respond.
John Steinbach, the Hiroshima and Nagasaki Peace Committee of the National Capital Area. Just wanted to thank Michael for what you guys did. And got a couple questions for Bob. The one has to do with Iran, and one has to do with some news recently last week. So do you know, if I remember correctly, Iran argued the reason they had to enrich uranium to 20% was that there was an international ban on medical isotopes, and so therefore they had to produce their own. So I'm wondering, do you know, did they deal with that issue in the negotiations? Is that why they're able to keep some of their 20% enriched
That's
uranium?
correct, and that research reactor that I pointed out can produce medical isotopes. But then again, once the sanctions are lifted, they can have international access to medical isotopes.
Sure. Yeah. Okay. Well, here's the other question. Last week, the Pentagon came out with their annual report, I think maybe 3 or 4 year report, where they talk about what are the plans for the military. And it was pretty predictable, you know, lots more wars and so on. But it ended with a note saying that we have to spend a whole lot more money on modernizing our nuclear weapons program. I don't know if you saw that or not.
Yes.
And was that purely propaganda? Because my understanding, part of this I heard from you, is that we're spending as much or more now in real dollars than we did when Reagan was president on that very issue. So why are they asking for more?
Well, I think there are a couple reasons. One is that in exchange for garnering a vote in support of the New START arms control agreement between the United States and Russia, the Obama administration agreed to essentially plus up the spending for the nuclear weapons complex, including refurbishment of the production infrastructure, which is very old and antiquated, and the so-called platforms of delivery, the missiles, the bombers, the subs. That's one explanation. The other explanation is that we're dealing with what I call the glacial bureaucratic drift of the Cold War bureaucracy. Presidents come and go, congressmen come and go, but this particular system seems to endure and sometimes thrive. And they are not necessarily under direct control. There isn't all that much adult supervision. Having worked in the Energy Department for a while, you begin to, and having dealt with being oversight of the Energy Department in the Senate, you have to understand that these nuclear bomb factories, Y-12, the largest and oldest of the weapons project. They dominate the wage and benefit structures of large geographic areas that make or break statewide elections. And these guys know how to play this card very well. And so it's very difficult to go after them. The last time there was a serious downsizing of the nuclear arsenal was with the end of the Cold War in the late 1980s. And for the first time, President George Herbert Walker Bush asked the mainstream military through the Joint Chiefs of Staff, what should we do with all these bombs, and what should we do? And they basically came back in 6 months with a report that said get rid of as many as you feasibly can. So 6,000 weapons were unilaterally withdrawn, independent of any arms control agreement. And the nuclear weapons complex of the Energy Department was downsized by 80% of its installed capacity. Since that time, the mainstream military has not been consulted. Who has been consulted on this are the ones that have the vested interest in it, the Strategic Command of the Pentagon, the nuclear weapons laboratories of the Department of Energy. And they tend to dominate the discussion. And I think there's going to be a showdown over time because the costs of having a large burgeoning nuclear arsenal the size we have and the costs of maintaining it, as I pointed out, is that even though our arsenal has declined by 300%, the costs of these weapons per unit has gone up 500%, and it's going to keep going up. And this is going to cause conflict within the military in terms of military readiness, other military items, and so it's going to become an actuarial war of sorts.
Thank you. Okay, yes.
Yeah, Mr. Alvarez, I'd like to address this question to you because of your technical expertise and also your experience working on the Hill. Right after this agreement was reached regarding Iran, immediately some of the politicians came out in opposition to it. Mostly Republicans, even some Democrats were very skeptical of it. Now, I've heard some of the leading scientists who understand nuclear issues, who understand the technicalities of this agreement, explain why it was really a very soundly constructed agreement. I'm wondering if over this 60-day period, these arguments by people with real expertise in the field are going to have any bearing on these people who oppose the agreement. Can you actually explain the scientific issues to them and make any headway?
Well, I mean, you can make that, frame that question in the context of global warming. Sometimes facts don't matter. It has to do with, thinking with your guts instead of your brains. And what's at stake here is a shift in the dynamic of the Middle East, where those of us who were around for a while remember the Shah of Iran when he was in power, and that was the U.S. government's strategic military ally for the Middle East, not Israel. Israel felt very unhappy about this because this is a Muslim state, a Shiite-dominant state. And rapprochement with Iran is looked upon as a greater threat to Israel from a different perspective. And so there's more of an emphasis of vilifying this. And if you see the rhetoric, or you listen to the rhetoric of some of these presidential candidates, Lindsey Graham, if you're tired of war, don't vote for me. There is a strong element within our body politic of the right-wing conservative militarists who see our nation as bristling with nuclear weapons and in a constant state of war, particularly in the Middle East, and they don't care if it broadens out on a regional basis. That's their worldview. It has, in a way, religious connotations, which some of them may not agree to, but once you penetrate that. But I think that in this case, Obama holds the trump card because they cannot muster enough votes to overcome a veto of this agreement, and they all know it.
Yes.
Hi, my name is Paul Magno. I've had the privilege of doing a lot of support work for the Transform Now Plowshares the last few years. Michael, I just wanted to ask you if you could share and summarize some of the testimony that Ramsey Clark offered at the pretrial hearing, since he wasn't allowed to testify in front of a jury, about about the nuclear arms race and about the non-proliferation treaty from his particular perspective, because I thought it was significant testimony, and I think it's worth sharing.
Over 9 months went by from when we did the action on July the 28th of 2012 until the start of the trial, which lasted for 3 days from May the 6th until May the 8th of 2013. Two of the federal government employees, Judge Shelley and Judge Emil Thapar, they put their heads together and they decided on a certain listing of certain things that we, the defendants, would not be permitted to raise in defending ourselves when the trial was to start. They said international law was not permitted, God we could not mention, conscience, religion, the common good, human rights. There's a whole lengthy list of things that we could not mention. We could only address ourselves to a very limited range of issues dictated by the U.S. government. We were permitted to call various witnesses. One of them was the top law enforcement officer of the entire United States government in 1968, Attorney General Ramsey Clark. He was in office as Attorney General in 1968 when the Nuclear Non-Proliferation Treaty was born into existence. The U.S. government signed onto it. Its provisions took effect in 1970. He said on the witness stand, Chair, under oath, that the United States government was in criminal non-compliance with its legal obligations under the Nuclear Non-Proliferation Treaty, which requires, as you said, to make good faith efforts to eradicate its nuclear weapons arsenal and to stop proliferating them. Well, according to this literature here, the U.S. government has billions of dollars slated to continue to proliferate nuclear weapons for the next 30 years. Elsewhere, I have read that the U.S. government plans to continue to have a nuclear weapons arsenal and to continue to proliferate them until calendar year 2080, which is 112 years after the Nuclear Non-Proliferation Treaty was born into existence in 1968. In a word, the United States government is unlawfully continuing to be in non-compliance with its legal obligation to make good faith efforts to stop its nuclear weapons addiction. The jury, by the way, was not permitted to hear the Attorney General Ramsey Clark say under oath on the witness stand that the U.S. government was in non-compliance with its legal obligations. As a matter of fact, under the international law, the Nuremberg principles, the Hitler government was trying to get nuclear weapons in Norway during the course of World War II. They were not successful, but as a consequence of the Nuremberg trials after the defeat of the capitalist, militarist, nationalist Nazi German government of World War II, they had the Nuremberg trials. Various people were executed for criminal activities done under the dictates of the laws of the Nazi government, and as a consequence of the Nuremberg principles body of laws that were born into the international law structure, which the U.S. Senate ratified as part of the U.S. constitutional law under Article 6 of the U.S. Constitution. I, as a citizen of the world and of the U.S., I have a legal obligation to oppose U.S. government criminal activities, which are continuing and with no end in sight. And the U.S. government is dictating to other countries, including the Iranians, and they have no intention whatsoever to stop dictating outside of the rule of international law to the rest of the world.
To
Yeah, thank you very much for coming, Michael. And the Nuclear Free Zone Committee would like to present you with a T-shirt of the Nuclear Free Zone. And I do have a question. Were you or any of your colleagues who were incarcerated able to spread the word while you were in jail? Were you able to engage some of your fellow prisoners about the reason you were there, and et cetera, et cetera?
Yes, I tried to continue my missionary strivings as a Catholic. The Saint Pope John the 23rd, before his death on June the 3rd of 1963, he condemned nuclear weapons. Dorothy Day, the foundress of the Catholic Worker Movement, she condemned the nuclear weapons in 1945. Dr. Martin Luther King condemned the nuclear weapons in 1959 when he was only 30 years of age. We have a wonderful heritage of support for the rule of law, and the prophets Isaiah and Micah over 2,700 years ago were foretelling the time when we would have total global demilitarization. It's not a question of if, it's a question of when. Yes, in answer to your question, at Bradford in the northwestern quadrant of Pennsylvania, there were approximately 1,400 fellow inmates in the main camp, another 300 in the camp, a stone's throw away, total about 1,700 inmates, and a good proportion of them through the grapevine or directly from me found out that I was there because of my opposition to the U.S. government state illegal terrorist nuclear weapons policies.
Yes.
Yeah. Well, first of all, the references I've heard to the concentration camps and the Nazi, they're all entirely irrelevant and appropriate, and I would include biological weapons. We were looking at the German and Japanese biological weapons programs too. Much of what we derived from the Cold War was from the supposedly most evil regimes the world had seen. And if the president was here tonight, and as he was yesterday at the press conference, I would accuse him of the height. He represents the heights of hypocrisy in my mind. And one of the things he said yesterday was that there were just two options. One was diplomacy to negotiation, and the other was war. And I would assert that war today is just as genocidal in terms of the impact of the weapons and everything, and also the long-term devastation that one nuclear weapon would be. And my real concern with it, I want to feel good about that there was a deal made, but my real concern, because I was wondering, why is there all this support, including the Pentagon and Secretary of Defense, all this? There's no opposition. Why? Because they can say the reason we got this deal was because we have nuclear weapons. Well, do you agree with that? And if so, shouldn't we be like talking about the deal in those terms of let's now do what we are what the president himself had said, called for when he won the Nobel Peace Prize. He gave a speech at the UN, and I'd want to go back and read that speech and see what he said, compare it to what he said yesterday.
A person could get very confused listening and researching the various contradictory things that President Obama has said about nuclear weapons. He hates them, and yet he is helping to proliferate them for decades into the future. He is not of one mind. As for me as a Christian, I want to accept Jesus' peace offer. He said, "My peace I give you, not as the worldlings would give it." And when Jesus comes, he comes with equity. One size fits all. The international body of laws is for all of the nations. We should not be dictating to some nations and permitting this criminal noncompliance with the rule of international law by other nations, such as the United States government. Is very illegal, immoral, undemocratic, and unpatriotic.
My name is Ian Barclay. And I would like to thank Michael, first off, for his courage and his conviction in doing what they did, and for revealing the fact that the Emperor had no clothes down there. You folks were able to penetrate, what, 3 different perimeters, I believe it was?
4 fences, and
4
we
fences.
had over a quarter of a mile walk through the up a ridge and down a ridge in the middle of the night. Yeah, we had to walk through over a quarter of a mile up a ridge and down a ridge in the middle of the night to get to the building. But the thing is, we planned it very carefully based upon information that is available to every Tom, Dick, and Harry in the world. We planned it with the idea that we might, with the help of God's grace, be successful in accomplishing our missionary work. And we prayed to God that we could do it. And for years and years, the U.S. government was saying that this was the Fort Knox of the U.S. nuclear weaponry. Well, 82-year-old at the time, none got there. And I'm sure Al-Qaeda could get there. The Ku Klux Klan could get there. The American Nazi Party could get there. Any Tom, Dick, or Harry, the campfire girls could have gotten there.
And I also want to inquire if it's my understanding that the guard who did eventually come upon you folks was required by his rules to have shot you, and he didn't, and thank God, and that he was subsequently disciplined or fired for that?
He was the only employee there. He was making something in excess of $50,000 a year. Nobody paid Sister Megan, who had done missionary work in Africa for over 40 years, by the way. Nobody paid her for her work on behalf of the common good and on behalf of the international law. To my understanding, he was the only single employee there. See, there are thousands of employees operating the Oak Ridge Y-12 site. There's another designation K something there. The whole site is over 50 square miles, and I lost my train of thought here. But anyway, there are several thousand employees work there, and he was the only one, Officer Garland. He had formerly been an employee at the Rocky Flats nuclear weapons site in Colorado years ago, and he knew very well, he said himself, that we were not terrorists. He knew that we were peace activists. He did not take out his handgun and kill Sister Megan, and apparently he would not have been fired if he had shot her dead.
Right. That's the total insanity of our whole process. That would have been a kudos to you. Thanks for protecting, in quotes, our facility. So I really thank you, and I really mean what I say when I say thank you for your fearlessness.
Thank you.
Thanks for coming to our fair city, the People's Republic.
There was I did have one question in my own mind's eye. Is it your area of expertise international law?
No.
Oh, does the
Nuclear weapons.
the IAEA does it try to enforce the provisions of the 1968 Nuclear Non-Proliferation Treaty relative to Iran as a signatory to that particular international law?
It's the Nuclear Non-Proliferation Treaty, as I said, is a throwback to the Cold War. And so you actually have the haves and the have-nots. The haves are the weapon states, and as you pointed out, there were some IAEA visitations, which actually we started in 1994, which the G.W. Bush administration pulled the plug on at Y-12. The enforcement of IAEA inspections, it's not uniform or consistent. It really is more oriented towards trouble spots. I mean, the IAEA's budget is less than that of the Washington Redskins. So it really, and the United States pays for about 60 to 70% of its budget. That's the way it works. The problem here is a structural problem having to do with Ramsey Clark has pointed out as a lawyer, is that, well, I don't know the law that well. I do know the United States and the weapon states carved out a loophole in the Nuclear Non-Proliferation Treaty that you can drive a convoy of trucks through to allow them to do as they please in terms of size and scope. Now, having said that, the Nuclear Non-Proliferation Treaty can be changed, and it can be changed. Those who are not familiar with Article 5 of the Nuclear Non-Proliferation Treaty, that approves of peaceful nuclear explosions. Those are now outlawed. And that visualization you saw didn't include the PNEs. One of the first fracking experiments was done with a nuclear weapon in New Mexico called Shot Gnome. But they discovered that the gas was so radioactive that the biophysicists at Lawrence Livermore declared it as biologic insanity to use it, and they stopped doing it. But the point I'm making is that it's going to take more than characters like me or Ramsey Clark arguing the finer points of law or the technicalities of this. It's going to take a political movement, and it's going to have to be international in scope and dimension. And what I'm trying to point out to you is that the humanitarian initiative is possibly, perhaps, and in my opinion, the most viable vehicle we ought to start getting onto.
And I'd like to, I have a quick question to follow up on that. Bob, can you illuminate for us the next steps in this humanitarian initiative?
Well, I don't really know what the next steps are going to be because this involves nation states and not NGOs. But the NGOs have been paying attention to their next meeting. There is a continued recruitment effort going on in the UN. I think that what communities like Takoma Park can do is to get resolutions through the City Council to support the humanitarian initiative, to encourage their members of Congress, their elected officials, to do the same. I must admit that I'm not all that well connected to this humanitarian initiative, but I must say that I see it as having great potential, and it's worth our while to sort of learn more about it as much as possible. There's actually a great deal of information about it on the internet that can be made available. Julie?
Yeah, wait for a mic, Julie.
I had a.
Okay, we'll have your question.
I just had a quick question, which is in terms of public knowledge of the situation. The mainstream media doesn't seem to be very helpful, and you know, if you watch Democracy Now! Or something, you might have a better perspective about this. But it seems like grassroots movements are the things that are going to make a change, unless there's some way of getting a broader audience for the facts.
I don't disagree.
Yeah, I had a question for Bob about the landmine movement and the success of the landmine movement. I wonder if you'd discuss that for us and tell us how it might apply to our situation.
Well, first of all, the landmine movement was, again, I think has very direct linkage to the humanitarian initiative because it basically is goes to the what's called international humanitarian law regarding the conduct of war. And this is a very formalized system in place. And it took a while, but the landmines were banned or considered basically war crime instruments. And it took on a great deal of international pressure. Celebrities became involved, Princess Diana, others, to draw attention to it. And we need to have that kind of focus and attention with the landmines. Now, having said that, this was something that didn't happen in a year. It took 30, 35, 40 years for this to come about. So we have to think of in these terms. I mean, the nuclear weapons program is thinking in 50 to 80-year time frames. And we as activists or whatever have to somehow think about that, and how do we maintain and restore institutional memory, things like that. You know, are all very important, and we have to think in those terms.
Okay, any other questions, comments? Okay, well, thank you all very much for coming tonight. We really appreciate the opportunity, and thank you, Michael. Thank you, Robert. Good night.